And now to business. You will be delighted to hear that we are on schedule. 200,000 units are ready, with 1 million more well on the way.
That's good news.
Please tell your master, Sifo-Dyas, that his order will be met on time.
I'm sorry, Master...
Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas is still a leading member of the Jedi Council, is he not?
Master Sifo-Dyas was killed almost 10 years ago.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. But I'm sure he would have been proud of the army we've built for him.
The army?
Yes, a clone army, and I must say, one of the finest we've ever created.
Tell me, Prime Minister, when my master first contacted you about the army, did he say who it was for?
Of course he did. This army is for the Republic. But you must be anxious to inspect the units for yourself.
That's why I'm here.
Few military forces have left as profound a mark on galactic history as the Clone Troopers. They arrived seemingly from nowhere at the opening battle of the Clone Wars, disciplined, unified, and bred for a single purpose. To the citizens of the Republic, they were heroes. To the Jedi, they were trusted comrades. To the Separatists, they were an army unlike any the galaxy had ever seen. Yet the story of the Clone Troopers did not begin on the battlefields of Geonosis. It began years earlier, in secret, on a world erased from the Jedi archives. There, millions of identical soldiers were engineered from the genetic template of one man, shaped by the lessons of 100 instructors who had willingly disappeared from the galaxy, and molded into the backbone of a war that had been orchestrated long before the first shot was fired. Every clone shared the same face, the same DNA, and bound by the same fate, but beneath their identical armor were individuals who forged their own identities through the bonds they formed, the experiences they had, and the battles they survived, and the choices that they made. Over the course of the Clone Wars, they would become far more than a manufactured army. They would become brothers, heroes, leaders, and ultimately, unwilling instruments in the downfall of the Republic they had sworn to protect. This is the story of the Clone Troopers.
You are listening to the Star Lores Podcast.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Are you stuck-up, half-witted, scruffy-looking nerf herder?
But I was going into Toshi Station to pick up some power converters.
Birth.
Welcome, little one. This is your first day. Your designation will be RP-01/138. We expect great things from you. And the Republic will call you to defend and give your lives, if need be.
The origins of the Clone Troopers stretched back years before the Clone Wars. Foreseeing a coming galactic conflict, Jedi Master Sifo-Dyas secretly commissioned the Kaminoans to create an army for the Republic. After his murder at the hands of Darth Tyrannus on Darth Sidious's orders, the project passed into Sith control, transforming an army intended to save the Republic into an instrument of its destruction. Seeking the ideal genetic template, Tyrannus orchestrated the hunt for the rogue Jedi Kamori Vosa, ultimately selecting the Mandalorian bounty hunter, Jango Fett, after he proved himself by defeating her. Fett agreed to the arrangement on one condition, that the first unaltered clone be given to him as a son, who would become Boba Fett. Using Fett's DNA, the Kaminoans engineered soldiers that preserved his combat abilities while reducing his independence. Their physical abilities were enhanced, their minds conditioned for discipline and obedience, and their aging accelerated, so they would reach combat readiness in just 10 years. As Kal Skirata later observed, the goal was never to create millions of Jango Fetts, but to create a more controllable soldier built from his strengths. The Kaminoans also explored making the clones sterile, as they routinely did with other military cloning contracts. Their own research, however, suggested that sterility introduced undesirable side effects, including reduced aggression, poor adaptability, weaker unit cohesion, and greater psychological instability. Unable to separate these flaws from what Kaminoan scientists referred to as the, quote, human factor, they abandoned the idea in favor of producing soldiers capable of initiative and cooperation on the battlefield. Even so, perfection would prove elusive. The first 12 clones grown from Jango Fett's template were experimental advanced recon commandos, later known as the Null-class ARCs. Extensive genetic modifications pushed the cloning process and their abilities to its limits. Only 6 survived gestation, and those who did emerge with fiercely independent personalities and an instinctive resistance to authority, but highly capable warriors. To the Kaminoans, the experiment had failed. The Nulls were considered unstable, uncontrollable, and unsuitable for mass production, and the decision was made to terminate them. Instead, they were saved by 2 men who understood exactly what they had become. Jango Fett refused to abandon the first sons created from his DNA, and Kal Skirata intervened on their behalf. Rather than allowing them to be destroyed, Skirata took responsibility for their training, shaping the surviving Null ARCs into elite intelligence operatives. Ironically, the Republic's first clone soldiers survived not because they obeyed orders, but because someone chose to defy them.
Training.
Bred to be perfect soldiers, these cadets must first be subjected to intense physical and mental training before heading off to war.
Creating the clone army was never going to be a short-term endeavor. From the moment he agreed to become the army's genetic template, Jango Fett largely set aside his career as a bounty hunter, remaining on Kamino to oversee the development of the soldiers who carried his face. His influence reached far beyond the genetic material from which they were grown. The design of the Clone Troopers' Phase 1 armor reflected elements of his Mandalorian equipment, while his combat experience and expectations helped shape the training that transformed millions of identical recruits into one of the most formidable military forces in galactic history. Perhaps his greatest contribution, however, lay with the Army's elite. The disastrous results of the Null-class ARCs forced the Kaminoans to rethink their approach. Their answer was the Alpha-class Advanced Recon Commandos, or ARC Troopers, a second generation that retained much of the initiative and creativity of the original prototypes, while tempering the instability that had nearly doomed the program. Unlike the fiercely independent Nulls, the Alpha-class ARCs remained loyal to the Republic and were willing to serve alongside Jedi commanders, yet they still possessed far greater autonomy than standard clone troopers. They represented a careful compromise between individuality and obedience, a balance the Kaminoans believed they had finally mastered. That same philosophy shaped the army as a whole. Clone troopers were born not as individuals, but as members of carefully organized birth cohorts of 32. From the moment they emerged from their growth cylinders, they lived, trained, studied, and slept alongside the same batchmates. These cohorts would eventually become the platoons with which they entered combat, forging bonds that had begun almost literally at birth. Brotherhood was not just genetic, it was in their upbringing as well. Time itself was another carefully engineered tool. By accelerating the clones' physical development, the Kaminoans reduced the decades normally required to raise an army to just 10 years. A clone reached physical maturity at the chronological age of 10, possessing the body of a man in his early 20s. The same genetic alterations that made such rapid production possible also ensured that the clones continued to age at twice the rate of a natural human, a sacrifice accepted as the price of creating an army before the coming war arrived. Yet, growing bodies proved easier than shaping minds. The Kaminoans understood that an army of millions could not function through genetic engineering alone. Accelerated physical growth placed immense strain on emotional and psychological development, threatening the stability of the very soldiers they were creating. To counter this, Administrator Tan Wei oversaw an extensive education and conditioning program designed to guide every stage of the clones' development. Military discipline and practical instruction took precedence over conventional academics, while carefully structured routines and close-knit cohorts fostered a sense of belonging that helped maintain emotional stability. Even then, time remained their greatest obstacle. With only half the normal years available for learning, young clones were expected to absorb vast amounts of knowledge at an extraordinary pace. To compensate, Kaminoan instructors employed specialized training helmets equipped with mental receptivity enhancers that synchronized brain activity and improved information retention. Every lesson, every exercise, and every moment of development was carefully orchestrated. By the time a clone first set foot on a battlefield, almost nothing about him had been left to chance. Every clone trooper, regardless of the role he would eventually fill, began with the same foundation: weapons handling, marksmanship, small unit tactics, physical conditioning, and military discipline formed the core of the Kamino's training curriculum. Only after mastering these fundamentals would a clone's abilities determine the path he would follow. Not every clone, however, was destined for the same battlefield. While Jango Fett continued to personally oversee the Alpha-class ARC troopers, the Republic also required soldiers capable of undertaking missions too demanding for conventional infantry, yet more dependable than the fiercely independent ARCs. The result was the clone commandos, a carefully balanced middle ground between initiative and obedience. To prepare them, Fett assembled the Cuy'val Dar, a cadre of 100 veteran instructors drawn primarily from Mandalorian warriors, alongside a handful of journeyman protectors and other seasoned specialists. Each instructor brought different experiences and philosophies to Kamino, but together they shared a common objective: produce small teams capable of operating independently under the most demanding conditions. Rather than training commandos as individuals, they organized them into permanent squads of 4, encouraging bonds of trust that would carry them through years of combat. The Republic would eventually field thousands of clone commandos, but each squad was built upon a brotherhood forged long before the Clone Wars began. Leadership followed a similar philosophy. Most clone troopers were engineered to function within clearly defined chains of command, but a select few displayed greater initiative, adaptability, and tactical creativity. These clones were developed as officers and commanders, entrusted with responsibilities beyond those of the average trooper. Men, such as Commander Cody and Commander Davis, demonstrated that although every clone shared the same genetic foundation, not every clone was expected to think or lead in the same way. Specialist ranks were also formed or engineered to fulfill other specified roles and duties, and whose specialized training would likewise complement the function they would fill. From pilots and artillery specialists to starship officers to assassins. Even with these carefully measured differences, every clone remained bound by the same guiding principles. Central to their education was the command code, a comprehensive set of regulations that governed every aspect of a clone's conduct. It reinforced discipline, duty, and absolute obedience to lawful authority, leaving little room for hesitation or personal interpretation. Whether serving as a line trooper, commando, or commander, every clone was expected to internalize the code until following orders became second nature. For the Kaminoans, training was never simply about teaching soldiers how to fight. It was about ensuring that millions of individuals, each capable of independent thought to varying degrees, would ultimately act as a single unified force. Every lesson, every exercise, and every carefully measured adjustment served the same purpose: to produce an army that could be trusted to carry out its mission without question, whatever that mission might one day become. The clone troopers' upbringing was clinical and meticulously controlled, lacking the families, childhoods, and personal relationships that shaped most beings. Yet, in the absence of parents or siblings, the clones found a family in one another. They were born, trained, and matured alongside the same batchmates, forging bonds that would eventually carry them through the battlefields of the Clone Wars. The Kaminoans themselves showed little sentiment towards their creations. Clones who failed to meet their exacting standards were often reconditioned or quietly eliminated, with only the rarest exceptions spared from that fate. To their creators, the clones were products to be perfected rather than individuals to be nurtured. Their training reflected the scale of the war for which they had been bred. From an early age, clone cadets endured relentless combat simulations across virtually every environment they might one day encounter. Dense urban centers, scorching deserts, frozen tundra, humid jungles, and countless live-fire exercises. Every scenario was designed to prepare them for the realities of a galaxy at war, ensuring that by the time they reached maturity, combat was not simply a skill that they had learned, but the only life that they had ever known.
Anomalies and aberrations.
Evie, you going somewhere? Get out of here. You're going AWOL, aren't you? Just go back to sleep, 99. This doesn't concern you. But you can't do this to your squad. My squad? We're nothing but a bad batch. Failures.
Aside from the experimental clones, such as the Null-class ARCs and a handful of other specialized projects, the overwhelming majority of the clone army was expected to conform to the Kaminoans' exacting standards. Every soldier was designed to meet a precise genetic and psychological ideal. Individuality was tolerated only when it served a purpose. Deviation for its own sake was considered a flaw. Perfection, however, proved impossible. Despite the Kaminoans' remarkable success, the cloning process inevitably produced a small number of genetic abnormalities. Most were harmless. Variations in eye color were relatively common, and some clones developed subtle differences in facial features that distinguished them from their batchmates. More significant mutations were far rarer. Roughly 3.5% of each production batch displayed abnormalities severe enough to warrant that the Kaminoans referred to as reconditioning, a deliberately vague term that could encompass anything from corrective genetic therapy to outright termination. One such case involved an entire company of clones whose vision failed to meet the Kaminoans' exact standards. One night, they simply disappeared. No explanation was ever offered, and they were never seen again. For the Kaminoans, statistics like these were not tragedies, but quality control. Chief Scientist Ko Sai and her staff continuously monitored every stage of a clone's development, searching not only for physical defects, but also for behavioral deviations. Observation vessels patrolled the training grounds, brainwave probes monitored neurological activity, and automated systems identified clones who appeared too independent or insufficiently compliant. Those deemed salvageable were subjected to neurological correction using brainwave cancelers and intensive reorientation programs. Others simply vanished into the reconditioning facilities. The process was designed to do more than correct undesirable behavior. It also served as a warning. Clones quickly learned that questioning their instructors or displaying too much independence could result in a one-way trip to reconditioning. Rumors spread through the barracks of brothers who disappeared without explanation, reinforcing a quiet but powerful lesson. Standing out carried consequences. For many clones whose personalities naturally drifted beyond the Kaminoans' ideal, survival meant concealing their individuality behind the appearance of unquestioning conformity. The irony was difficult to miss. The Kaminoans had spent years carefully preserving enough independence to create adaptable soldiers. Yet they remained equally determined to eliminate any independence that exceeded their carefully calculated limits. As the Clone Wars unfolded, these policies gradually softened. The arrival of Jedi generals and increased Republic oversight brought greater scrutiny to Kamino's methods, and outright terminations became far less common. Clones who failed to meet combat standards were often reassigned to support duties rather than quietly eliminated. One of the best-known examples was Clone 99. Physically frail and unable to serve as a frontline soldier, 99 spent his life performing maintenance and custodial work on Kamino. Though regarded by the Kaminoans as a defective product, he became a source of inspiration for generations of clone cadets, proving that courage and loyalty could not always be measured by physical perfection. Yet even the Kaminoans' relentless oversight was not infallible. Occasionally, aberrant clones escaped detection altogether. During the Clone Wars, one such trooper, remembered only as the Mad Clone Caecilius, suffered a catastrophic psychological break during combat, believing he was still participating in a live fire training exercise against disguised battle droids. He turned his weapons on his own brothers, killing members of his batch before he could be stopped. It was a grim reminder that even the galaxy's finest clone engineers could never account for every flaw or every consequence of trying to manufacture perfection.
Culture.
I want you to meet Commander Colt of the Rancor Battalion.
I want you troopers to remember, we're shoulder to shoulder on those front lines. Brothers! And sometimes we may quarrel, but no matter what, we are united. Rule 1, we fight together. So who's ready to step up first?
Although the Kaminoans engineered the clone troopers' bodies and minds, much of their identity was shaped by the people who raised them. Jango Fett was more than the Army's genetic template. For years, he remained on Kamino as the clones grew, while many of the Cuy'val Dar instructors, predominantly Mandalorian, passed on not only combat skills, but elements of their own culture. Nowhere was this influence more pronounced than among the clone commandos, whose instructors emphasized the importance of loyalty to one's squad, personal responsibility, and earning the respect of one's brothers. The surviving Null-class ARC troopers went even further, having been raised by Kal Skirata as Mandalorians in every sense except blood. As a result, fragments of Mandalorian culture quietly spread throughout the Grand Army. The Mandalorian language, Mandoa, first took root among the clone commandos before gradually becoming familiar to many standard clone troopers. Traditions also followed. One of the most recognizable was the Jag Eyes, a Mandalorian symbol awarded to warriors who displayed extraordinary courage in battle. Elite soldiers such as ARC Captain Fordo and later Captain Rex wore the distinctive markings with pride, transforming an ancient Mandalorian honor into one recognized throughout the clone army. Even so, the clones' deepest allegiance remained unchanged. Whatever customs they adopted from their instructors, they had ultimately been created to serve the Galactic Republic. Their Mandalorian heritage existed alongside that duty, never above it. For most clones, there was no contradiction between respecting the culture that had been shaped by them and faithfully carrying out the orders they had been born to obey. That balance, however, would not survive the war. When the Alpha-class ARC trooper Spar abandoned the Republic and established the Mandalorian Protectors in service to the Confederacy of Independent Systems, many clones suddenly found themselves fighting warriors who shared the traditions of the men who had trained them. Battles on New Bornalex and even Kamino itself inflicted severe casualties, and the shared cultural connection rapidly gave way to resentment. Too many clone troopers, Mandalorians, ceased to be respected instructors and instead became enemies of the Republic. The hostility grew so pronounced that some conventional units openly distrusted clone commandos such as Omega Squad because of their distinctly Mandalorian upbringing. In the end, the culture that had helped shape the first generation of clones faded almost as quietly as it had appeared. As the war progressed, newer generations of clone troopers were produced away from Kamino under the direct Republic supervision. Many were grown using Sparty cloning cylinders, a faster process capable of producing fully mature clones in as little as a year. With less contact between the clones and Mandalorian instructors, the traditions that had once flourished among the earliest generations gradually diminished. The rise of the Galactic Empire completed the process. As Imperial recruitment expanded beyond Kamino, the Stormtrooper Corps increasingly relied on enlisted humans and clones derived from genetic templates other than Jango Fett. The original Fett clones, once the backbone of the Republic's military, steadily became a minority within the Empire's ranks. Along with them disappeared much of the Mandalorian heritage that had quietly endured beneath identical armor for the better part of a generation. As the Clone Wars ground on, the Grand Army paid the price that every military eventually pays: attrition. Each campaign reduced the Army's strength, and unlike the droid factories of the Confederacy, replacement clone troopers required years to produce. At the same time, the first generation of clones continued to age at twice the rate of natural humans. By 19 BBY, only 3 years after the first Battle of Geonosis, roughly 2/3 of the original generation remained alive. Those who survived often appeared decades older than their chronological age, their prematurely graying hair, receding hairlines, and weathered faces reflecting the relentless pace of a war they had been born to fight.
Individuality.
Come, sit. Your helmets, remove them. Your faces I wish to see.
There's not much to look at here, sir. We all share the same face.
Deceive you, eyes can. In the Force, very different each one of you are. Please.
To many outside observers, clone troopers were little more than living battle droids, organic soldiers bred for obedience rather than assembled on a factory line. The reality proved far more complicated. Although they had been engineered for combat, years of campaigning allowed the clones to grow into individuals in ways even the Kaminoans had struggled to predict. Much of that change came through the Jedi, fighting alongside their troops instead of directing them from afar. Many Jedi earned the admiration of the soldiers under their command through courage, competence, and genuine concern for their lives. Commander Bly believed the Jedi led because they were simply the finest officers in the Republic military. Jedi such as Yoda, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Plo Koon, and Aayla Secura, in turn, regarded the clones not as expendable assets, but as sentient beings worthy of dignity and respect. They sought to accomplish their missions while preserving the lives of the men who fought beside them whenever possible. Ki-Adi-Mundi lamented that the clones had been denied the childhood and family every ordinary person deserves, and mourned each soldier lost under his command. Over time, the relationship between Jedi and clone became one of the defining features of the Grand Army. Officially, every clone was identified by an alphanumeric designation embedded within his biometric records. Yet, as far as the war progressed, those sterile serial numbers increasingly gave way to something more personal. With the encouragement and eventual approval of the Jedi, many clones adopted nicknames. Practicality certainly played a role. Captain Rex himself suggested that names simply made identical soldiers easier to distinguish. But they also became expressions of identity in an army built upon uniformity. That individuality revealed itself in countless small ways. Some clones adopted distinctive hairstyles, others personalized their armor with unit markings, kill tallies, or symbols of personal significance. Many came to mirror the personalities of the Jedi they served beside. Rex inherited Anakin Skywalker's willingness to improvise, while Commander Cody reflected Obi-Wan Kenobi's methodical professionalism. Partnerships such as Bly and Aayla Secura, or Plo Koon and the Wolf Pack, developed into relationships founded on mutual trust rather than simple hierarchy. To Grandmaster Yoda, those differences were more than superficial. Though every clone shared the same face, the Force revealed each one as a unique individual. Ironically, the very qualities that made the clone army so effective also exposed the limits of Kaminoan design. Most clones remained unwaveringly loyal to the Republic throughout the war, but a handful developed beyond the behavioral boundaries their creators had intended. Sergeant Slick convinced the clones were little more than slaves, betrayed his brothers to the Separatists in pursuit of freedom, costing countless lives before his capture. Ghost likewise abandoned the Republic, selling his services to the Confederacy. Perhaps most remarkably, Cut Lawquane deserted entirely after Geonosis, choosing instead to build a peaceful family life far removed from the battlefield. To the Kaminoans, these men represented flaws in the cloning process. To others, they represented something else entirely. They demonstrated that, despite years of genetic engineering, psychological conditioning, and relentless military discipline, individuality could never be completely erased. The same individuality was reflected in the clones' growing attachment to Kamino itself. Though created in laboratories, many came to regard the ocean world as their home. When the Separatists twice launched invasions of Kamino, clone troopers fought with exceptional determination to defend Tipoca City and the cloning facilities where they had been born. For perhaps the first time in their lives, they were not simply defending a strategic objective, they were defending home. Not everyone, however, shared the Jedi's faith in the clone army. Jedi General Ram Koda refused to command clone troopers altogether. A brilliant tactician in his own right, Koda believed naturally born soldiers possessed a level of intuition and adaptability that no engineered army could match. He instead formed his own militia from volunteer recruits, convinced that clones were too constrained by their programming to become truly exceptional warriors. History would grant his suspicions an unsettling measure of credibility. When Order 66 was issued, the overwhelming majority of clone troopers obeyed without hesitation, turning their weapons on the Jedi they had fought beside for years. The trust that had defined the Grand Army collapsed in a matter of moments, clearing the way for the rise of the Galactic Empire. Kodo was not alone in his skepticism. Quinlan Voss openly distrusted many clone officers, particularly rigid commanders such as Faye. While elements within the Republic Navy and the Commission for the Protection of the Republic viewed the clone army with suspicion or outright contempt. Even within the Galactic Senate, concern over military cloning eventually led to legislation that lightly restricted cloning technology and centralized its use under Republic authority. Publicly, the law was presented as an ethical safeguard. In practice, it ensured that control over the creation of armies remained firmly in the hands of the state. By the war's final year, the clone troopers had become far more than the army the Kaminoans had engineered. They had become brothers, veterans, heroes, and in the eyes of many Jedi, friends. None of them knew that the purpose for which they had truly been created had yet to be fulfilled.
Now a word from our sponsors.
Buying a used pod racer? Don't trust a seller's story. Get the pod facts.
Pod facts, no spots. Pod facts, no spots.
Accidents? Check. Ownership history? Check. Illegal modifications? Check. Race records? Check. Know the pod, know the risk. Get your pod facts report today.
Podcast is not responsible for injuries, dismemberment, vaporization, engine explosions, sand-related incidents, or encounters with Tusken Raiders.
Welcome aboard the Millennial Falcon. This is Christian.
And this is Jordan.
And we're on the beautiful world of Seleucami, where we're actually visiting the old hut where Cut LaQuain had deserted the Republic military and decided to venture out and make a life for himself. He's long since gone from here, but this is where we are.
Absolutely. But before we get into the wonderful world of clones and genetic freaks grown inside of a vat,
there's nothing wrong with vat babies, Jordan.
Let's do some housekeeping. If you like the show, if you enjoy it, if you like what we do, please go ahead, rate and review us wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the show to anyone who may enjoy this content. We much appreciate it. Also, we are on all the social medias, X, Instagram, Discord, Facebook, that kind of stuff. All the links for that will be in the description of the show. So go follow us there, reach out to us, send us a DM. If you want to reach out to us with some mailbag questions or comments about an episode, please send it to starlorespodcast@gmail.com. And you can also do any business inquiries can go there as well. One final thing also, a couple final things actually. Please become a supporting member, patreon.com/starlords. We got a bunch of bonus content behind the paywall there. You can also get access to ad-free episodes as well if you become a member on Patreon. And I want to give one final plug. If you haven't checked out my new podcast, Principalities and Powers, go check it out. And Christian also has a new one coming soon. Bug him about that. Send us messages. Tell him to get it released.
Yeah, it will motivate me to actually get it done. So,
yeah. Okay. So check out that podcast. All the links will be in the description. I'll link the new podcast I'm doing in the description as well. So you can go check it out. Much appreciated. All right, let's get into it. The Clone Troopers.
Yes. I don't know if I've mentioned it before on this podcast, but they are my singular most favorite faction. And we will be talking more about them in the future as well. Mostly because I can control what we write about and talk about. But there's actually, we did just scratch the surface. There's still a lot of depth and a lot of ground to cover with the Clone Troopers.
I did sort of want to do a disclaimer. We have sort of done Clone Trooper adjacent topics in case anyone's like, haven't you guys already covered the Clone Troopers? Not exactly, not specifically the Clone Troopers. We've done Grand Army of the Republic.
Yeah.
And I think we did another one that was...
And then we did the General Clone Wars.
Yeah, the Clone Wars. So obviously we're going to discuss Clone Troopers there, but this episode is specifically dedicated
to the boys in white. Yeah. So that's the first distinction. And like I said, we're only scratching the surface. There's so much Clone Trooper content. The whole Clone Wars media project really pumped out so much stuff that there's so much ground to cover. Not just with clones either. Definitely we'll be revisiting the Confederacy and lots of topics there to discuss. But
I mean, it's really such a fleshed out era. I think I sort of think the Clone Wars is this intermovie period, right? Where they fleshed it. I think they started this with like the Shadows of the Empire story arc.
It's a very similar idea,
I think they started that and they're like, oh, let's do something like that, but for like the prequel trilogy, and we're going to make it way bigger and way crazier.
And I'm glad that they did. I mean, like, think how much ground you have to cover for a whole 3-year war. That really gets skipped over. You have episode 2 where it starts, and then episode 3 where it ends. But you have 3 years of just so much potential. And then I would argue there's also the same to be said about the in-between period, the dark times between episode 3 and episode 4.
Absolutely.
And I think that is an area that I wish had been explored more before the Disney purchase. I think that's kind of what derailed the potential for that.
Yeah.
But that definitely could have been another era that could have been really turned into a whole multimedia project.
You could almost call it like the interwar period. In a sense, you know, like we had in our own history, we have our own interwar period between World War I and World War II. And many historians, I think correctly, see them as sort of really the same war. It's just a continuation because it was never really resolved after World War in 1918.
Yeah.
And the final resolution came with, you know, the surrender of the Germans in Central Europe there. Anyways, roundabout way to say that, there's this sort of like tension and non-resolution that happens sort of at the end of the Clone Wars, where the Republic sort of transitions into a galactic empire, but it's still kind of the same government apparatus. It's just taking on a new evolved form, I suppose.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I will give Disney credit that is an area that they have explored. They have whole shows like Rebels. They have lots of cuts, even though Obi-Wan was not great as a show. There are elements of it that kind of
like an interwar show.
Right, exactly. So they are making efforts to explore that period. And there's a lot of potential there too, like I said. And even for the clones, That's something I'm actually personally very fascinated with, is the idea of what you do with an army after the war is over and what happens to an army. And you can take that in so many directions. You can deal with like the mental and psychological scars of war. You can deal with the like, what does the government do with its veterans after? You could even use it as like an instigation for a lot of plot. I know
how do you rebuild the planets that got destroyed?
Yeah, exactly. Like, there's just so much potential, and I think the whole era is still very fertile for new and interesting stories to come out of.
I will say this was perhaps a missed opportunity with Disney. Is I hold that they should have done a Boba Fett prequel that would have been in like the interwar period.
Yeah.
And maybe even get a new actor. I don't know, or de-age Tamora Morrison.
Not even Tamora Morrison. The kid who played young Boba Fett.
Oh yeah,
actually kind of looks like a young Tamora
he does.
Morrison.
Yeah.
He would be a great pick for.
I thought that would have been a better direction to go if you're going to do a Boba Fett show.
Yeah.
Rather than,
what we got.
Bringing him back from the dead.
Even then, I could have just done something better with that.
You could have.
I agree. A young Boba Fett show could have been really cool.
But you also could have explored the world of like what happened.
The interwar galaxy.
And you also could have, coming back to the clone troopers, you could have tied a lot of like the clone trooper history to Boba Fett, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Like he's the perfect character to follow through that period. He also lives in this gray zone where he's not really affiliated with the government, so he kind of walks the path that you could explore a lot of different angles, and ties back to the clones and like what the after effects and what happened to them. Kind of harkening back to that Obi-Wan episode, you do see a clone trooper who's like a homeless veteran kind of trope. And he's sitting there with his armor, he's all disheveled, his hair is all grown out and stuff. And it's just like, how do we treat our veterans now, and what are the consequences? Again, all topics that could easily be explored in any kind of series that takes place in that time period. Kind of to marry it with another sci-fi universe that I like, Warhammer 40K. That's one of the key factors that starts with the Horus Heresy, is a lot of the Space Marines, who are these people that were engineered for warfare and not much else after, start to question what their purpose is after the war is over. After the Great Crusade, what is the Emperor going to do with all these legions of soldiers that he created to live for one purpose? And there's a lot of something like that you could do with clone troopers too. They were literally engineered to fight a war. What do you do when the war is over?
I do feel there's some kind of just like resonance between like the Space Marines and the clone troopers. I know, like, obviously a Space Marine is like a demigod.
They're not on the same level, but there is like
thematically I think there's a lot of similar
there is
things
a mirror
going on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that actually brings me to my next point of discussion, actually, is the super soldiers and sci-fi trope. Personally a trope I absolutely love. I
like it too. Yeah, for sure.
And even, well, I'll get into that other franchise later, but like you have things like Spartans from Halo, like we mentioned, Space Marines, you have the clone troopers.
Even like the Marvel universe, a lot of Wolverine
Captain
is a
America.
super soldier. Yeah, Captain America is the super soldier motif kind of is a good plot device to use.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's one I've always been obsessed with. And to tie it to another franchise I really love, Metal Gear also has to do with clone soldiers and just really, again, a whole other field that's just ripe for exploration. In the Halo context, dealing with a lot of the psychological side effects. Soldier, I believe Kurt Russell starred in it. A show or a movie that I don't know how well it did commercially, but I absolutely loved growing up. And a lot of those elements of engineered soldiers and like fighting with raised soldiers was like a big thematic element. And I think it's maybe tangentially tied to the Blade Runner universe. I'll have to double check that.
Oh, okay. Interesting. But I remember watching that show, but man, long time ago.
Yeah, I love it. I'm going to watch it again here because it's been a while too. But again, it's that topic of like sci-fi super soldiers has always drawn me in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even they're not super soldiers, but like the movie Aliens.
Yeah.
it's these sort of like genetically modified freaks that are designed to be predators, right? And they can hunt and kill anything.
But not the predators.
No, not the predators. But they are a predator.
Yeah. The xenomorphs.
Yeah. No, not capital P predator. Yeah.
Another franchise that I also love as well.
Yeah, I've actually been watching them.
Oh,
The original ones. So, but yeah, it's I know they're not like clones, but they are like, again,
genetically manipulated.
Yeah, this idea of genetically creating a weapon, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
No, absolutely. Coming back to Clone Troopers, I did want to explore a couple of things. One, a lot of the themes of this episode specifically is the clones and their journey towards individuality. I do really like the very uniform, no nonsense kind of clone trooper, but I also do appreciate clone troopers that can develop over time. They become interesting, independent characters as well. I like both sides of that coin, so I don't want to pick favorites in terms of interpretation. Shows like Gennady Tartakovsky's Clone Wars really depicted them as that like really focused soldier trope type. They didn't really delve into independence or anything like that. They weren't characters. They were just plot elements more so.
Yeah.
Whereas in like the Clone Wars series, the animated series from Dave Filoni, they become characters, and you kind of have to do that. For the show's formatting, you need interesting characters who don't just talk about the mission, like they have to have a personality as well. But also to be able to distinguish those characters amongst, like, if you had a whole squad of clone troopers that you're following on a battlefield, you'll have to be able to, as an audience, tell them apart. So there's a natural storytelling component to that, as well as the interesting topic broadly of like these clones becoming individuals and learning how to live in the galaxy and the influence of the Jedi on them, right? Like the Kaminoans are very not sympathetic, whereas the Jedi obviously are the opposite of that, and their ideals start to permeate amongst the Grand Army.
Yeah. And I will sort of defend Filoni's interpretation of clones here, in the sense that in the real world, if you're like trying to clone human beings and trying to control for all these variables that might make them more independent, less subservient, it's probably going to be almost impossible. Like there's always, I think that is a science that would be, even if it was ethical to even do it.
Yeah.
It's going to be very difficult to make, like,
if not impossible.
Yeah. If not impossible. I think just one, it's very difficult to understand the human mind and how it actually works. And much less like with different environmental pressures on you to, form and shape your personality and whatnot and character traits. And even just freak accidents of nature, certain, I don't know, DNA or genetic expressions coming through stronger than others.
Yeah.
You just might not, it might be impossible to actually control for all those, right?
All the variables, yeah.
So I actually do like this interpretation where there are some clones, maybe not all of them, but some of them who kind of go off the reservation a little bit.
Yeah, and they develop their own personalities and stuff.
It kind of comes across as more realistic to me.
Yeah, and it's definitely a whole field, again, that's very rich in potential, right? Like, that is exactly what I was going to say, is like having that exploration of nature versus nurture, how these different experiences shape the same template in a million different ways, right? Yeah. Like, you just happen to be the soldier who's lost all his brothers versus the soldier whose brothers are all intact. How does that affect that particular clone? And you could cut that pie like literally a million different ways, right?
Yeah.
Which you see throughout the army.
And before you even see this a little bit in like the Thrawn trilogy with Joruus C'baoth, right? Yeah. Who's a clone of a Jedi, but he's like a madman.
Yeah.
And it's like, it
shows to be fair, some of that might be an element of the cloning process that they use for him specifically, and the fact that he's a force sensitive.
Yes. For sure.
Yeah.
But I think it is sort of perhaps again just demonstrating that it's like a difficult task to like clone a perfect
copy
specimen of exactly what you want, right?
Yeah. And I mean, like, even if we took ourselves, for example, if we cloned Jordan today, that little baby Jordan, how he's raised, what his experiences in life are, the end product by the time Jordan becomes the Jordan of this same age, who knows what that person might be like. And it is interesting, though, the other side of that coin of what traits remain the same.
Yes.
And
because there will be some that,
right.
I'm sure if you did that, like, that clone would have some uncanny similarities.
Yes, absolutely.
But they would still be a very different person.
And they would have lived a very different life than you did.
Yeah.
And all the factors that would go into that shaping. And it's actually very interesting. Even having kids, they're not exactly clones, but they do share your genetic material.
Mm-hmm.
And even certain behaviors I've observed in my own children are
absolutely
freakish.
I can attest to this.
It's freakish what kinds of behaviors appear to be genetic just by like no one taught them that, and somehow they are replicating some of my habits, good or bad. But yeah, it is very interesting. And again, it's just a topic that's just ripe for exploration, especially using the clone army.
There's also like all sorts of philosophical, ethical questions about cloning too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Which I don't want to get too much because that would be too long of a
it's its own episode.
Yeah, for this episode, but it is something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. And those again, cloning and genetics. A lot of that came from my obsession with Metal Gear. There was a lot of talk of that as well in there. One thing I didn't like about Filoni's use of individuality is I think they kind of stray too far from the military aesthetic. So you got like clones growing their hair out or like having facial hair and stuff, and like dyeing their hair crazy colors. Like I think
that's a little.
They could have maybe kept it within a range.
Yeah. Moderated it a little bit.
But again, I see the difficulty in having to have 1 million unique characters.
Yeah.
It's easy for the audience to instantly recognize. But yeah, outside of that, and that also explains kind of like there's within all the different media that clone troopers appear in, you have tons of different people doing voice acting, not just Tamora Morrison. He does some, but there's plenty of other voice actors that have done clone troopers.
Yeah.
And some of them are close, like Bradley Baker, I believe is his name, does a lot of the clone voices in the Clone Wars series. And he's pretty good about adding some variation to the different characters, so also kind of telegraph their different personalities.
Yeah.
And he tries to sound somewhat like Tamora Morrison, but there's other clones that like not even close, and they just have completely different voice actors. The clone commandos and clone troopers in Republic
which is
Commando.
A little strange.
Well, so this is what I was gonna say is, like you can try to do your best, but at the same time,
like I can understand if maybe they have different
accents,
accents or quirks in their voices,
but
their vocal cords are genetically should be the exact same as Tamora Morrison,
certainly. But I think there's
Jango Fett,
behavioral elements as well as in how you speak.
That's true.
That could be associated again within a range. We're working with reality in the sense of like Tamora Morrison could not physically voice every clone project in every appearance, but there is tolerance for the variations in voices, both in how they were raised by different trainers or their experiences, like we said. And there is some genetic variance even in the cloning process. Like we said, eye color was one prominent variation that could happen amongst the clone troopers. So maybe their vocal cords were slightly different. Maybe something in the decanting of the clone embryo or something might have caused a change. But I just wanted to address that reality that there are tons of different voice actors who have done clone voices over the years. But they are all, at least the ones that we know of that are clones of Jango Fett, are still that same person. The other thing to maybe consider, again, kind of Republic Commando, the video game being one where the clone troopers all have very different voices to differentiate the squad members when they're talking, because a lot of it's through comms. But you could also think that maybe to the individual clones, other clones sound different. Kind of like how when twins kind of can tell each other apart,
Yeah.
of close family of twins versus the general public.
Yeah.
Things that you perceive as being exactly the same to the clones are like radically different, right? Like
Right.
you talk a little different than I talk.
Yeah,
but we're both clones.
They pick up the subtleties a lot
Right, exactly.
better.
So to them, it sounds like completely different. They know which clone is talking just by little variations in the tempo that they speak at or the level or whatever.
Yeah.
So just another interesting consideration.
It is funny. Yeah. I was talking to a friend one time. This is just a tangent here, but their parent, one of their parents is not, they're an immigrant from Asia. And I mentioned to them one time their accent of this parent.
Yeah.
And they didn't even clue in that their parent had an accent.
Yeah.
They were like, "Oh, I guess he does."
Yeah.
And it was just like it was something they had like never even thought about.
Yeah.
Which is funny, like when you're so familiar, it almost your brain almost perceives it differently, right?
Yeah.
Like whereas someone who isn't as familiar with them, clearly I can tell there's an accent, but like, if you know what I mean, some people they just perceive things differently when you're very familiar with the person's voice. So, but yeah, that's an interesting thought.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Really quickly, we can get into some mailbag stuff, and then we'll take this home.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So from our Spotify comments, kind of going back to the Grand Army of the Republic, episode 66, not an accident. In there, we kind of brought up, and I was trying to avoid this topic for this episode because it is something I've already addressed a couple of times, but the inhibitor chip question.
Yes.
And in that episode, I did challenge our fans or listeners to give me a reason to not like that or to like the inhibitor chip, because if this is your first time hearing it, I'm not a fan of the inhibitor chips.
Yeah.
So from Stumpy Longlegs 2, he says, I'm not a writer or anything, but I think a better way they could have gone about inhibitor chips was to make only later clones have the chips. That way, clones such as Cody and Rex still had some form of autonomy within them as Order 66 came about. They could have even had a story arc involving the Kaminoans making a super secret team of clones whose purpose was to eliminate clones without inhibitor chips, as they feared they would interfere with Order 66. I don't hate it.
I don't hate it either. Yeah.
I still prefer that they just don't exist, but I will take that under advisement, Mr. Stumpy Longlegs. Henry said Chancellor Palpatine, a senator for Naboo before the war began, had everything thought out for years to come. He had planned to turn the Jedi's own troops against them for years. We did an episode on Sifo-Dyas, so I can't remember what episode number that is off the top of my head, but go back and listen to that if you want to get kind of more of the backstory around the origins of the clone army and kind of how that whole complex planning came about for the clone army, but it had always been part of the plan. El Drinko Prime says, I think the inhibitor chips are a no-brainer for Sidious. If you have an army that's loyal to a fault, what would happen if they decided their loyalty was better placed elsewhere? We see this with clone deserters who abandon the Republic for a multitude of reasons. The inhibitor chips, in my opinion, are an insurance policy for Sidious to ensure his plans. That is a fair point, and even in this episode, we did address the clones who are aberrant and did kind of, like Jordan mentioned, strayed away or kind of deserted or even betrayed the Republic and worked for the CIS. Again, don't love it. I don't think that has to be the only way. I mean, if you're gambling, let's say, maybe you account for the potential for some loss and some rogues, but the overwhelming majority should still execute their mission if everything else is good. Like I said, the conditioning, the behavioral conditioning, the training, the genetic engineering, all that should have been enough, I think, that, even if 3% of your clone army defects or otherwise develops a personality, which again, like you said, we couldn't account for. Maybe they didn't account for clones developing independence and personalities, and that could be an interesting story of clones who refuse to follow the orders, and you could have clone-on-clone violence, right? Like, that to me is a more interesting story than brain chip made me do bad thing.
Yeah, I think like the previous commentator mentioned about having other clones who maybe only had the inhibitor chip or something. I think you could even just take out the inhibitor chip altogether and just have clones that haven't been so ingratiated inside of the Republic army and with the Jedi.
Yeah.
And who are just more indoctrinated and even more disciplined. And you just have like those who are, they're cards that are closer to your chest, if you will.
Yeah,
and you play them when you're ready.
Yeah, and they did happen. Like we do have clones that started to get produced off of Kamino and using the Sparty system, right? So there's precedent for everything other than brain chips.
Yeah.
And then last comment here is from Flicko. I have to say the matter of the inhibitor chips is a tricky matter, and I fully agree it is a tricky matter. But I don't want to beat this dead horse every time clones come up. I'm only addressing it because the comments were addressing it, and I wanted to respond to the comments.
A lot of good comments on that one.
Yeah. And then really quick, one kind of sort of correction I wanted to make. I think it was either in the Grand Army episode or the Clone Wars episode. We did sing the praises of Mr. Dave Filoni. I do want to correct the record. I no longer hold those views. Yeah, I have soured on him quite a bit since then. I went back to listen to those episodes when I was writing this one just to see what ground we had to cover still. And I do no longer hold those same sentiments.
Yeah, I've definitely soured on him quite a bit. I still will give him credit.
I'm not going to be a total like everything is bad all the time.
Yeah, but, to me, he just like he definitely doesn't bat 1,000. Let's just put it that way.
No, and I do think he was very good at the social engineering side of like, you know, acting as Lucas's successor and all that. I think there is reason to believe that some of those sentiments were overblown.
I think he thought if he just walked around in a cowboy hat and acted like a Star Wars nerd, like everyone would just fall in love with him, and this was kind of his brand.
Yeah, and now that he does have creative control, I think we're seeing the cracks a lot more obviously than maybe we have in the past. And
to be fair, there are I've seen some Star Wars commenters or content creators rather, even years ago, pointing out some of the especially continuity flaws with the Clone Wars. So there are some people, I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know some people have been pointing it out for years.
Yeah, and I'm sure they're finally feeling vindicated after all this time. So props to you guys.
I don't know. I'm not as angry at Filoni as I am at like Kathleen Kennedy or Ryan Johnson, but I'm still kind of like, I'm over it. I'm over Filoni.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm okay if they gave creative control to someone else. For sure.
With that, I think that's about it. Make sure to go rate and review the show. If you want to become a supporting member, patreon.com/StarLords. And don't forget to check out our YouTube. We are on YouTube. So go subscribe there. All right, everyone. Have a good one.